The following may contain offensive language, adult humor, and or content that some viewers may find offensive. The views and opinions expressed by any one speaker does not explicitly or necessarily reflect or represent those of Mark Radulich or W2M Network. Please listen with caution, or don't listen at all.
TV party tonight! What? TV party tonight!
Oh, we got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews.
Don't want to talk about anything else.
We don't want to know.
We're dedicated
To our favorite shows.
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hypnotoad.
Scary dog!
Benson at Blurnsville.
Futurama!
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to TV Party Tonight. I am your host, Alexis Hejna, and tonight we are discussing The Midnight Club, the latest foray from Mike Flanagan into Netflix. And it says it's a horror mystery thriller, but I think the three of us have agreed that's probably not the most accurate description. Joining me is Robert Winfree. How's it going, man?
It continues to go. A lot of rain, snow in the slightly higher elevations. Actually, snow where I used to live, which is about 30 minutes from where I currently live, but it was up a mountain. So we're getting ready for winter as fall starts to bid us adieu.
And of course, we are so glad he's joining us and still alive. This is what the third show I've done where we've had a case of, oh, thank God, Jason Teasley is still alive. You just keep nearly dying on us, man.
Yeah, I'm living up to my namesake and just cannot be killed off. I'm glad to be back, especially talking some kind of what we believed was supposed to be horror with you and Robert. So definitely happy to be here.
Yeah, I suggested doing this when it was first announced. I thought the idea was really great. It's like, okay, Mike Flanagan, who has done The Haunting of Hill House, Blind Manor, Midnight Mass, he's given us some amazing horror movies with Oculus, Gerald's Game, and Dr. Sleep. I think we can all agree those were great films.
Yeah.
And it was like, this sounds so much fun. It's the idea of these teenagers who are in a hospice house, and the idea that they make a pact that if one of them when the first one of them dies, they will give a sign from beyond the grave to let the others know what is going on there. And that concept got so stretched out, it just completely lost any and all meaning. So yes, this is brought to us by Netflix and Intrepid Pictures. We have our 8 close, terminally ill young adults residing in the Bright Cliff Home Hospice just outside of Seattle. We focus mostly on our main character, Ilonka. She has thyroid cancer. She goes to Bright Cliff after reading an article that a previous resident had somehow walked out miraculously cured. And she's hoping to go to Bright Cliff and find that cure. We also have Kevin, who she develops a pseudo-romance with, who has leukemia. We have her firecracker bitch of a roommate. That's the term they use. Anya, who is Irish, has bone cancer, and she's stuck in a wheelchair. We have Sandra, who has lymphoma and is a devoted Christian to the point that they actually get tired of her for throwing in angel porn, as they call it.
Yeah.
We have Cherie, who we don't learn a lot about because she is a pathological liar, but we do know that she has very wealthy parents who I think she mentioned they work on a movie set, but again, we don't know how far that extends. We have Natsuki, who has depression and terminal ovarian cancer. Amesh, who has glioblastoma.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably masquering the pronunciation there.
That's pretty close.
Yeah. And Spencer, who has AIDS. So we're probably going to skip the whole episode to episode thing, and we're just going to go ahead and dump. We're going to, I was going to say drive in and jump in, but
Freudian
I think
slip. It's a Freudian slip.
Very Freudian, and just talk about this show as a whole, because again, the three of us were very interested in seeing this and discussing this when we first heard about it. We had our hopes very cruelly dashed. So, gentlemen, who wants to go first?
Go ahead,
I'll
Jason.
let. All right. Yes. When you first pitched this, and I first seen the trailer, with the long list of hits that we was looking at, I was really excited about this, especially the premise of, pretty much what it was pitched as a teen horror type of genre that is really popular now. That we're seeing a lot of more stylistic toward. But when I started watching it, after about 2 episodes, it plateaued for me. The most interesting character and most memorable character was the roommate. Uh, and she's the only one that I felt that was written very well. Everybody else kind of was pigeonholed into I guess you could say, a stereotypical role. She's the only one that had range and that you've seen any kind of real arc with, because you kind of, as it goes through up to her spoiler, her eventual passing, um, you see that she has struggled and seen a lot of people come and go, and this is why she has such a hard exterior. She went from this really firm believer to this really cynical person, and you see this transition, and it's the only character that you feel that anybody can relate to. Everybody else is very one-dimensional and pigeonholed into like I said, a stereotypical um, role, and it and it's all over the place. You get the stories, which I love the stories, but outside of them meeting and telling the stories, for me, this fell really flat. It became very, um, I don't want to say stagnant, but it drug a lot, and it took a lot of momentum that it did build. It would take the wind right out of its sail just as fast.
Definitely. Robert, would you like to add anything to that?
I agree. If we're talking broadly, sort of the conception behind this, as I understand it, this is based on one of the young adult novels that Christopher Pike has written. And if were a teenager, you've probably read at least one thing that he's written at some point. And I know a few different things of his are currently on the table at Netflix, so good for him getting paid. But the kind of conception here was, we take the setting from the Midnight Club, and then the stories that they tell each other are essentially the other individual Christopher Pike stories. And it's not the worst idea, but there's a few pretty glaring errors of execution here, some of which I don't know how you get around. Let me be very clear about that. I got a big gripe with the physicality of the actors here, all of them. The only one who actually looks like she's dying is Anya. And if you want to sell me on terminal, like these people are dying, there's got to be some physicality to that. You can't just say, well, they're dying. Amesh is getting there, and I give him a bit of credit, that actor and the way he's written, for kind of starting to showcase that towards the end of the season. But the rest of them, they should not be looking as young and as vibrant and as healthy as they are. And look, I'm certainly not advocating for teenagers to be, put through some of the terrible things that are done to adult actors to make them reach physical requirements for acting. But it's a bit of a hard sell when, oh no, our main character is dying of thyroid cancer, when she's just she looks very normal. Like very normal. And it's one thing to have cancer. You can have cancer and look normal depending on where you are in the fighting it process.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you're on hospice, I'm not saying bedridden, concentration camp survivor, but there's got to be something more to what's going on to you physically than what they showed. You get a little bit of that with, I think it was Chris, who's always a little bit too pale, a little bit sunken eyes. but it's
You mean Kevin?
Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah.
It just never quite matches up with what we're being told, and there's a pretty big disconnect there. I like the setting. I think they get a lot of mileage out of it. Flanagan has a great eye for set design and for the cinematography that goes into kind of gothic style features. So we get some nice shots. I would love to understand his obsession with Robin's Egg Blue, because I've seen all of his shows. So we get that.
I could think of worse colors to put in a horror movie. At least it's not nursing home green.
True.
Well, at least Nursing Home Green might have conveyed the hospice aspect a little better.
Yeah,
Might
but
have.
that color has a real negative effect on a lot of people. When oh my god, what the hell was the name of that Marvel series that Mark and I reviewed? I can't even remember the name of it. We talked about how it had very little color except for a nursing home green, and it actually made me feel sick after a while. Just like
She-Hulk.
not She-Hulk, not She-Hulk.
I was gonna joke and say Loki, but I was on the review for that one.
I was just going by the physical ill. That's why I said She-Hulk.
Fair enough.
Hellstrom. That's it.
Oh.
Yeah, that was. I mean, we always joke like, "Oh, that was so painful to sit through." It's like, no, Hellstrom actually was. I joked with Mark. I was like, after watching that back-to-back episodes, I literally started going through the similar symptoms of like seasonal affective disorder, because it is so unsaturated that it is literally unpleasant to look at and makes you feel sick.
Yeah. We don't quite have that problem here. So again, I like the sets. The show drags. It just does. There's no two ways around it. Some of the character interactions wind up a little bit flat. I kind of agree with Jason in that most of these they're more caricatures than characters, and I think we're meant to kind of develop them more as time goes on, but it does make for a pretty poor viewing experience when, again, you have Natsuki. So what's her, character? I mean, she's dying, so there's got to be something complex here. Well, her dad's dead and she's depressed.
Yeah, we don't find out about the whole depression thing until it's like, what, 2, maybe 3 episodes from the end? And it kills me because that was a great arc. Actually, we find out that she actually tried to commit suicide from depression, and her mother saved her, and it was when she was recovering in the hospital that the doctors found out she had cancer, and she realized that she didn't want to die anymore. And I thought, that as someone who has fought depression for years, I was like, that is so impactful, and that alone would have been a great story arc.
Ditto. Some of the names are escaping me, but Ditto our gay character. Like, Spence? What's his deal? Well, he's gay, and his religious mother doesn't accept him. Okay. Anything else? Nah, that's kind of it.
And they could have used that. They could have moved that arc a little bit earlier in the season, and because I felt that arc was really rushed. Like when he goes to visit, and it's like he states his case, and then she's visiting on Family Day. It's like there's no gravitas of the characters, like what they're dealing with up on top of their illness, their family struggles and everything. I felt that a lot of, like Alexis says, a lot of things were good concepts just executed poorly, and that they could have sprinkled in throughout the season. Like, even just focus a little bit of backstory on each episode and just kind of dive into the backstory of each character to where they came to the hospice home and what they struggled with on their journey there, and then bridge from there. Because I think that's one thing that really took me out of it. It's because I felt nothing for these characters outside of Vanya.
Definitely. And going back to what you guys were saying about Spence, we do get a little bit with him in a later episode when oh my god, what's the name of the nurse who's also gay? Takes him to a meeting with this group and they're doing activism. And he talks to her, he's like, how did you get into that? And I thought, this is kind of cool. This guy who's been sheltered and just feels so, everything that's happened with his parents. And he sees, well, maybe I can do something out of this and get involved in activism about that. Again, that would have been a really good arc. But we're not getting that. It also, again, I know
you just get a feel good moment.
Mm-hmm. And again, the stories are really good, but I think they're part of the problem with the pacing on this. Yeah. Because as much as some of these, and I'm going to say some of these stories, some of them started out okay and got really old really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very uneven.
It does make me laugh really hard, though. The first episode, Natsuki is telling a story, and it basically just evolves into literal jump scare after jump scare after jump scare.
Which is in the Guinness Book of World Records now.
Exactly. Oh god damn, you're making me choke. Way to go, Jason.
There we go. If I gotta fight death, so do you.
Thanks for that. Well, it's funny because Mike Flanagan has always been a director that doesn't rely on jump scares. He uses them very sparingly in his films. I think that's something we've all, gravitated towards with his style. And now he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most jump scares in a single episode.
Yeah, and that's and going back to like Haunting a Hill House, the tone is what made that so scary and so interesting, not the up in your face jump scares. It had a few, but it was very well veiled. This was up in your face, and it totally was a stark contrast from his style. And I think that might have been what took me out of it too, because I'm so used to his style, and then just seeing a very stark contrast kind of took me out of things a little bit.
My other big problem with this series is the incongruity of the timeline. This is set in the late 90s.
You've mentioned this a couple of times on the chat. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, this is set in the late 90s, which is a fine enough time period. It's about 30 years ago, give or take. And now
we need to set it up where they don't have cell phones and easy access to internet. That's fine. You need a reason to keep these characters isolated.
Yeah, and it's a fine time period to set a show in, as good as any other. But this is especially true for any of us that lived through it. Raise your hand if you're on the show and were approximately the age of these kids at that time period. I would have been on the younger side. They are graduating again like 97-ish. I graduated in 04, but close enough. There's a few things that go on here that it just bugs me. If you're going to set something in a time period, there's concessions you have to make to make me believe that, make anyone believe that. A big one is dialogue. There's a real flaw in this, is especially true of contemporary filmmaking. You might be true as well if we go back in time a little bit. You just make young people talk like the young people of of real time rather than the young people of the time you're setting the film in.
Yeah, you don't do research on how kids talked at that time. Or it's more of a case of we don't want to alienate our viewers, so we want them to gravitate more towards these kids, and they will gravitate more towards them if they talk with contemporary speech styles. There.
Yeah, and again, I'm not ignorant to some of the considerations going on here, but if you're going to make a thing out of it, you do have to make concessions to that, and none of the language here is authentic to the time period. Not a single solitary bit of it. You're relying on contemporary idioms from 2022 to make them sound young rather than stuff that would be more contemporary to 1997. And
not arguing with you, but can you give an example? I'm just curious.
Well, they do a lot of what the actual.
Okay.
Which is, that's a late teens linguistic phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't a thing in the 90s.
Okay. Again, it's
There's
like I'm sure you're right, but I was just curious if you did have an example.
there's also the omissions. I mean, again, there's a bunch of slang that didn't get ported over, which is again somewhat okay because certain slang goes like it becomes obsolete when it stops being used.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I get it, you don't want to inundate us with it, but you could remind us that this is a different time period. By way of example, there's an episode of Supernatural, and Lord knows there's plenty of them, but one of the brothers goes back in time to the 30s, and he meets Elliot Ness. And Ness at one point takes issue with some of Dean's vocabulary, like because the usage of different words has changed, and then hits him with a string of 1920s and 30s slang, and Dean is left utterly befuddled by this. And like, you need something. We don't have to go that far, and we're not talking that extreme for the timeline, but you needed a little bit of that. And
Did you need one of the kids to go as if, or you're all that in a bag of chips?
something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Saying that, I think I just got another gray hair.
okay. But yeah, I mean,
As if would have worked great. Like that.
yeah.
That's one that translates very easily via context clues, if nothing else, and was incredibly. That was
Overused.
omnipresent. Omnipresent. It was
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't need to be saying "eat my shorts" or anything like that, but I mean, but you still have, you got to, and this goes back to something we talked about shortly off air, is you had to identify your audience. Was you going a young teenage demographic? Was you trying to get the nostalgic value from the, people growing up at that time? If so, the slang, the even the cadence was very
Yeah.
not there, and it kind of like I said, some of these things, as I did live through it, I graduated in '96. The fact that the dialect, the cadence, the voice cadence, there was nothing to like connect me to that, to pull me into that time frame, because I guess they thought, just the sound of a dial-up modem was going to be enough to spark nostalgia and make sure that I
Dial-up
know
modem
that
for a
and that
minute.
gigantic box of a computer.
Yeah.
Oh my god! Yeah, just watching
Use
that.
of floppy disks.
And it was just one of those things that I feel that the disconnect for the audience, they didn't know their audience and who they wanted their audience to be, and it kind of created a disconnect because, like I said, we're all three here, we're pretty much the go-to people here at W2M Network when it comes to horror. And if you're going to do a horror timepiece, make it make sense. Yes, I'm going way back. Me and Robert covered Crimson Peak,
Mm-hmm.
and it was
Good
very
movie.
stylistic. It was very stylistic, and me and him loved it because it was so true to the time period that it added the level of horror.
Mhm.
This, it doesn't know its identity. It's all over the place. It's very disjointed, and I think that if you're going to do a period piece, like Robert said, you need to do your research, get the voice cadence down, get some mannerisms, something to tie that to it, rather than being all over the place and trying to use contemporary language in a dated timepiece.
I mean, let me preface what I'm about to say with, I know why they didn't do this, and I don't even necessarily object to it in some kind of how dare you kind of way. But if you're going to set a show in the 90s at any point, and I apologize if this word offends anyone listening, but none of your teenage characters say fag, you have failed utterly to understand what what language of teenagers was like in the 90s. And again, I get it. I don't use that word in casual conversation anymore. because I understand that the meaning and the usage and the reaction to it has changed. But I was a teenager around this time period, and everyone, if you were a teenager around this time period, you did it, you said it. I know, because everyone did.
To build off that, also that's gay.
Yeah.
And the word
And
retarded.
here come all the demonetized marks on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was just the vernacular of the time.
Yeah.
Again,
I'm not saying you guys are wrong. You're 100% right. We had not entered the PCH.
Yeah.
Right.
You know.
And so again, you've lost a lot of that. You've built in a lot of 2022 sensibilities into 1990s teenagers, and that's not just language in this instance. Alanka befriends a random stranger she stumbles across in the woods. Now, if you live in 2020 and 2022 or whatnot, and you're considering how we interact with each other, that's not the craziest thing in the world. As someone who, again, was approximately of this age in the 90s, you did not talk to strangers. We're all of 5 years removed from the height of the stranger danger
roughly.
advertisements and whatnot. So I understand why it has to happen. I don't even necessarily hate that your theoretical smart person is conned by a professional con artist. That's what they do. That's not my objection to this. My objection is more, you did not engage with random people that you ran into the same way you do nowadays. And it's a pretty big, because it's so important to what happens in the story, it becomes an even more glaring anachronism from the 90s.
I give credit to Samantha Sloyan, who played that woman in the wood, Shasta. She played Bev Keane in Midnight Mass, who is, I do honestly think, going down as one of the best horror villains we have had in a while.
I heard this term about her, and there's characters like her. They're called hate sinks. And the line I heard was, she's the most effective one that this particular, someone on Twitter, I think, the most effective hate sink since who's the teacher from Harry Potter? The name escapes me.
Severus Snape?
No.
No.
Dolores
Umbridge.
Umbridge. Dolores
Yeah,
Umbridge. Yes.
Umbridge, yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey, that's a
Yeah.
good way to put it.
Again, this is a character that just all of your hate gravitates right towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, she does a really good job. And I'm just going to say, all of the actors here do a fairly good job. I mean, I remember a lot of us were excited to hear that Heather Langenkamp, one of the ultimate last girls of horror iconography, was going to have a prominent role on this. And another thing I'd like to add is that the stories have a little bit of fun by using the same actors who are telling the stories as characters. So you see a lot of these actors playing multiple roles, and I thought that was actually a very creative idea. I mean, when we think about stories, in our heads, we tend to juxtapose people we know in those roles. When we read a book, we tend to see the main characters as people we know. That's just the way our imagination is filling in the gaps. So the idea that the characters in these stories being the character, the people around them, really makes a lot of sense. And I thought that was a great idea. And again, he lets them show off more of their acting chops. Especially Langenkamp, who gets to play a lot of different roles in this. Again, and we're not going to talk about the stories just yet, but I loved her in Anya's story about the dancer with the devil, and that she's playing a good role.
That was probably my favorite story out of all of them.
Yeah, Langenkamp just has so much fun with it. You get a one role with she's a cop, and she comes in, and she's got kind of a Boston and New Yorkie accent a little bit.
Yeah, and because that's being told in a noir style, there's a little bit of the 50s speech patterns and whatnot that kind of go into that. And she is clearly having a blast with all of this.
Oh yeah,
she leans into the characters heavily, and you could tell that she is just enjoying herself.
But another thing I do want to talk about is the mystery, which I am using with gigantic air quotes. Because again, Alanka reads an article about this woman who was at the hospice, and she walked out for 2 weeks and then came back miraculously cured. And this is Ilanka's quest. Is she wants to find the cure, not just for herself. She fought at first for herself, but then she really starts to bond with the other teens, and she wants to get them cured as well. And we find out more about this cult called the Paragon and the symbol of an hourglass that keeps showing up in random spots, and that they did cult activities to the 5 goddesses, and just it. And again, I thought this was going to be the big thing, that we were going to get a lot in that angle. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Paragon really gets explained or explored.
It doesn't
Not a
get
whole
fleshed
lot.
out.
Now, the cult aspect of it is kind of downplayed. When she discovers that, again, Shasta, who winds up to be the woman who had the same kind of cancer that Ilanka has. Her real name, her not hippie name, was
Julia
Julia
something?
Jane.
Yeah.
And she says, no, the Paragon, they were misguided, but they were, on the they started in a good place and they got misguided. And Heather Langenkamp's character won't talk about it, and there's not a lot of information available. And the story that we're told about, them finding a bunch of people dead in the basement after a failed ritual to appease the old gods. I did get a bit of a kick out of Amesh when he discovers, when they all come down to that weird room in the basement, like below the mortuary room that's in the hospice. He just looks around and actually quotes Lovecraft. I think he's like, oh, Cthulhu Fatagan, which it popped me.
I guess the thing I never understood was that we don't find out if anything the Paragon did actually works. Langenkamp's character, the doctor, says that Julia pretty much just got healed by luck. That
she was
one
misdiagnosed.
Misdiagnosed. One of the treatments worked. I don't know. So, and it's true. Sometimes terminal illness just goes away. There are cases of that.
And you look at the time period too. Misdiagnosis was not an uncommon thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of MRI technology was not nearly as widely available, so you're doing a lot of this off of X-rays or other less sophisticated scans.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of a few of them, I believe it was just like endoscopies, which nowadays you have a camera pill you can swallow. Back in the day, it was, no, this is going down your throat and you get to be conscious.
Yeah, anyone else remember that scene from The Exorcist when they're doing the brain scans?
Yeah.
Yep.
Ugh, that doesn't make you want to stay away from a hospital for the rest of your life. I don't know what will. But again, we don't find out the extent of this cult and these 5 goddesses. This was built so much with the story arc that they were trying to find out if there was something beyond the grave. That they're like, we're all going to die. One of us needs to give a sign that there is something. And I thought that mixing up with this cult, they were going to start hearing from beyond the grave. And it wasn't the right answer, kind of like Flatliners meets Ouija or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
I could see that premise working a lot better.
Yeah, as we talked about, there's a real identity crisis in this show. I don't mind the ambiguity for the characters, right? So I'm okay with the characters not being sure if there's mysticism or if it's all just the real world and we're hallucinating as we approach death and we're on all these meds, and we're some of us are just desperate enough to believe anything about potentially healing ourselves. I'm okay with the characters having some ambiguity around this. It's a much trickier line to walk to try and confuse your audience with it. This is real close. I'm not saying it crosses this line. This is real close to J.J. Abrams' mystery box phenomena here.
Good one. We also have these 2 ghosts that repeatedly show up in visions to Ilanka, and we later find out to, oh my God, I'm already blanking on the dude's name, and I corrected you on him earlier. Kevin, thank you. That's how bland the show is. We can't remember the characters. And we do find out at the end that these are apparently the spirits of the people who founded the hospice or built the home or whatever it was. But why are they saying it's like, there you are and I'm hungry?
Yeah.
Why are they doing that? Again, if there's a reason and I missed it, someone let me know.
It's
It's
none
like
that I
this-
picked up on.
Yeah, it's like I'm hungry. Is the Scooby Gang going to show up with some sandwiches? What?
We are perilously close to Scooby-Doo territory in this show. Like,
Yeah, I was
we're on
waiting
that
for-
precipice.
Oh my god.
Which I mean, and that's not too far fetched because you're just waiting for somebody to pull the mask off. Which, surprise, quote, that does happen. You pull the mask off to see what actually was going on with the ritual, the new ritual, and find out what's really going on with that. What the misdirection
But again, we don't know
was.
if that ritual would have worked or not.
Yeah,
we do
right.
not find
Yeah.
out. It's like
Here's
it's like would that
here's the only thing I appreciated about that. There's a bit of a thread in criticism that comes from, and I've probably been guilty of this in the past, mind you, but the notion that all kind of twists and misdirections have to completely blindside you, rather than necessarily be, adequately predictable. There's some changes to the dialogue from Shasta in the lead up to that, to her, ritual. That if you're paying enough attention, you realize what's going on there. Like, not only is this not for Alanka, but her cancer has come back. There's some of the stuff she stopped using the past tense when referring to it, and
nice catch. I didn't
little
catch that,
stuff like,
actually.
again, there's some little stuff like that kind of just, if you're paying a bit of attention, it makes that whole sequence more ominous. And
Yeah,
that's it. And again, to the credit of that scene in particular, we don't know if it would have worked, and I'm willing to give that at the moment a little bit of we should have a slightly clearer understanding of this. At the same time, that sequence works mostly because we're not fooled, because the audience is like, we're sitting here going, no, you listened to a hippie you ran into in the woods who's a member of a death cult, and now she's telling you to drink the potion. Just shut up and drink the, like, we know this is a bad idea. We know what's actually going on here.
yeah.
And that again, that dramatic irony there, the audience knows something the characters don't. We know this is bad. We know if you drink this, you're going to die. She doesn't. She's still a little unclear about what's going on.
But how did she get away, though? She doesn't just live in the woods. She runs a company out of the woods. We see her shipping materials. It's like this. She's got to be. It's like maybe she fled from the cult, but she's still going to be relatively easy to track.
What would have been what I was waiting for is when they was down there getting ready to do the ritual, to see like a druid, like undo his hood. It'd be M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong going, what a twist.
Yeah, it's not handled the best. Again, how she escapes, I think they're going to lean heavily, and when they try to like explain how she's still on the loose for the future seasons, I think they're going to be leaning heavily into the lack of fast information relative to what we expect nowadays, and that's a weak crutch.
Okay, guys, you keep mentioning future seasons of this.
Yeah, there's not one.
No, this is a isolated miniseries. There is
Was
not.
it?
Yes.
Yep, this is
Are
it,
you
which
sure?
makes this ending all the worse.
Yeah. That's
I could have.
why.
I could have sworn I read on the wiki that this was conceptualized as multiple seasons.
I am not seeing anything on reception or future. I'm not seeing anything here. It says it's been renewed or second season's coming so and so. I am not seeing any of that, which frankly makes the ending of this so much worse.
If if this is a singular, then that's a lot of crap. Hang on, let me see if I can find where that was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm hoping that this was originally conceptualized as a multi-season idea, and the fact, and like maybe halfway through film, they're like, oh no, it's just a mini-series. But at the same time, this is what Flanagan excels at, these miniseries for Netflix, like Hill House, Blind Manor, Midnight Mass. So I'm finding it a little hard to believe that he went into this thinking, okay, I can just answer all the questions in season 2.
Yeah, I know I read that. I'm not sure exactly where
Yeah,
it was, but I remember distinctly getting to the end of this and then looking that up because otherwise this doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. Again, you might be right, and this is just
yeah. I'm looking
a
on
very
IGN right now.
Okay, here we
very
go. On the series
underwhelming.
release in October 2022, Flanagan confirmed that the series would also adapt all 28 books of Pike's, having pitched the series as the Midnight Club, but the stories the kids tell each other will be other Christopher Pike books planning for multiple seasons. But
Okay, so
I'm not seeing anything else on here about
there-
when more seasons are going to be released.
Okay, so well, at least we know so at least the plan is multiple seasons. So I'll give a little bit of a pass in the sort of conceptual phase to that. That said, man, you picked the wrong time to have a Netflix show not necessarily resonate the way you wanted it to. They are not as forgiving with their money as they used to be. Gone are the days when they'll just throw a ton of money at Lock and Key to make 3 lackluster, crappy seasons of television. Still
Well,
bitter.
Let's just hope that the Fall of the House of Usher does better to revive Flanagan's name. Still looking forward to that. Really intrigued by what he can do with that. Besides, it's freaking Edgar Allan Poe. I am a sucker for anything related to Poe.
Yeah.
Also looks like a handful of the actors who are in this are also coming back, in addition to the usual cycle of actors that Flanagan works with. Bruce Greenwood's coming back. Carla Gugino is going to be coming back.
Well, plenty of the actors in this one are people he's worked with before. He finds the people he likes to work with and brings them along for the ride.
It's worked for Tim Burton all these years.
Works for Scorsese.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I do want to bring up, because we talked about the isolated stories that the kids tell each other, and I think we all agreed that most of those were pretty good. Jason, you said your favorite one was, I think it's called The Tale of the Two Danas.
Yeah, because that's a struggle that I feel a lot of people deal with, feeling that they're pulled so many directions at the same time. And I don't know. I've said it myself, and I've heard many other people say it. I wish there was just 2 of me to be able to get everything done. But then you have the pure and you have the yin and yang, the totally 2 ends of the spectrum. You have the good girl that does everything right, and then you have the wild side. And it shows the contrast of basically the inner turmoil that a lot of us deal with. We have a certain persona that we have to abide by when we just want to be carefree and do absolutely whatever we want without no repercussions. And it gives you that, and that's what I resonated with a lot, is because it's that inner struggle and you see that you're kind of protecting yourself, and that a lot of people around you have your best interests. That's why they keep you basically in a confined, per se, leadway, so you don't go too far to one end of the spectrum or other, and they protect you from yourself. And that's the story that I thought, 1, was the best portrayed, 2, the best written, and, like I said, visual aspect, and that I could relate to the most.
All right. Robert, you want to tell us what your favorite of the stories was?
Favorite.
The mass murderer. It's Robert.
The one with Dusty.
The serial killer.
The serial killer. It's Robert. It's the serial kids getting killed, and we all know that Robert said that doesn't happen enough.
Claw hammer to the head. For the record, I said if you're gonna put kids in your movie and you want to have them be in believable peril, you do have to kill one or two of them along the way.
And that
That's just-
happens.
That's just how that goes. Dusty's story's pretty good. I'd be remiss not to at least kind of poke a little bit of fun at Terminator meets War Games.
You're talking about Spence's story with the
Amesh.
cyborg? Oh, Amesh's story with the
With time travel and how do
Yeah.
you play thermonuclear war?
yeah.
The only
I was
the only winning
excited to
move is
see.
not to play.
I was excited to see that other actor from Midnight Mass back in that one.
Yeah.
I've been a fan of his since he was in the iZombie series. He's a really good actor.
Yeah, he's very good.
Mhm.
So there was so that one I poked a little bit of fun at. The cyborg, I didn't hate that one. I think of what one might have actually stuck out to me.
Why don't I go ahead and tell mine?
Yeah,
Think about it.
I mean, again,
Um,
there's only a handful to choose from. I don't think any of them really resonated with me.
I think the one that stuck the most with me was Road to Nowhere. That was Natsuki's story.
It's a good one.
That turns out it was all in her mind while she was contemplating suicide. Not only, again, I have fought and suffered through depression for many, many years. So not only is that relatable to me, but I thought it was one of the stories that had genuinely the best scares. There is a real air of anxiety when she picks
Yeah.
up these two hitchhikers and they're saying random things and they're telling her, like, pull over. No, don't pull over. Pull over. No, don't pull over. And she thinks she's seeing things and she's not sure. And she keeps looping and she's looping around, going in a cycle. And she can't, it's like there's something going on. That's one of the stories I felt that really put you the most on edge. It was
That
told
one-
very well.
I think that was the most atmospheric of the stories. Like that's the one that actually kind of gets you into what's going on in that way. I mean, my battles with depression, my suicidal ideation never got towards, never attempted, never even really planned. Again, where you fall, like ideation is it's a gradient in that respect. At least it used to be. I don't know if they've changed the criteria and formulas again because they switch those every so often for nebulous reasons.
But the fact is that I've never attempted either, but even if you haven't, when you suffer from depression, that line, you can live, but it's going to hurt. That hits so hard.
I mean, look, man, if you ever wonder why people who are so depressed sleep so much, because it doesn't hurt when it sleeps.
Exactly. No, that one really got me.
And it kind of portrays the endless feeling of despair and like you're trying to find your way and you feel like you're drowning in your own thoughts. And that portrays that really well as
that was probably the most kind of fully realized, most well conceptualized of the stories.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other thoughts on any more of those stories, Robert?
No, nothing in particular. Again, there's individual mileage is going to vary on them. There's a little something for everyone in there. They touch on a bunch of different kind of subgenres. Again, you've got a neo-noir detective story. You've got the haunted serial killer. You've got the good witch whose power will potentially cost her life, and what's beyond the grave. Pretty classic doppelganger / deal with the devil, neither of which is a good thing. Just don't do it.
Hey. And like we talked about this, I think it suffered from trying to have too much filler.
Oh.
And I think you could have trimmed about 3 episodes off this and condensed it down and made it a little bit more tighter. Move some of the things around where you have the arcs playing out over those 7 episodes. And I think you would have got a lot better of a composite than what we actually got.
And the fact is that the different style of stories that these kids tell is enjoyable, but I
Yeah.
think it actually leads to a bigger problem. We've talked about the pacing and the tone. This show can't figure out if it wants the focus to
Yeah.
be on the stories or on the kids themselves. And I honestly feel that that is a major problem.
Yeah,
It's a serious problem.
It's three essentially separate things trying to be woven together. You have the stories that the kids are telling, the kids themselves, and the cult. And you're trying to weave it together, and it's really hodgepodged.
Yeah, there's not a lot of cohesion there from a narrative perspective. This show also doesn't quite know what its audience is. We've talked a little bit about this, but if you're aiming for the younger demographic, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if you are, having this be rated TVMA and dealing with, and the language in particular is a real problem for, 12 to 13-year-olds that might be wanting to watch this for young adult stuff. They're probably not going to wind up watching something that uses profanity the way this show does. If you want to lean heavier into a more adult audience, then your language is, the language isn't a problem anymore, but there's not a lot about this that's very compelling to the adult viewers. I had a similar problem. I haven't watched Cobra Kai, and there's a very specific reason. I don't care about the lives of teenagers. And there's a lot of that show that requires you to care about the lives of teenagers, and I do not. Again, to everyone out there that doesn't like Cobra Kai, hey, good on you. Not me saying that's not a critique that's not a style critique. That's a buy-in critique. Like, you have to buy in to enjoy the show, and this is part of the buy-in, and I'm not going to do it. This has a bit of a similar vibe. You have to kind of care about what the teenagers are going through, and it's not an impossible ask, but it's a little bit of a big one, and this all kind of struggles to be juxtaposed with the reality that these kids are dying. That's something that gets a bit of lip service, but there's only a couple of times when it actually resonates. One being, when Anya actually dies, and good on them for pulling the trigger on that one, by the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, man. If you set this show with this premise and none of them die by the end of it, you have failed. Like,
Absolutely.
I think just having one die is kind of a failure, because this goes back to us talking about it being multiple seasons. These kids are terminally ill. They have to die.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but we knew that Ilanka was not going to find her mystery cure. The show cannot have the message, oh yeah, there's a cure out there for terminal patients.
No, you can't give that false hope.
No, we can't do that.
There's I don't know why this crossed my mind when I was watching this, but there's a real possibility, I think, that artistically, at least, each one of the individual patients represents one of the different stages of grief, right?
That's an interesting thought.
You've got because Kevin is
Ilanka's denial.
Ilanka's denial / bargaining. Like, she'll do whatever it takes to get out of it.
Well,
Again, like / I'm not quite sure where exactly she falls there. Spence strikes me as the one kind of in denial about it, like, because he just, and I think a little bit of that is because their portrayal of AIDS here is, again, leans on a 2020 understanding of that particular illness rather than the 90s reality of it.
The fear mongering that we've seen in the 90s.
Absolutely.
And again,
Anya would definitely be anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anya's very angry. Again, you've got Kevin as acceptance. Because he has the line actually earlier when he talks with Ilanka, where he says, everyone here kind of talks about the fact that we're dying, but they don't get it.
I do really like his line at the end of the series. Dying is a poor excuse not to live. Good line.
That is a good line.
Very good line. All right, so then we have Cherry, who is the Cherie, thank you, who is the pathological liar. We have Amesh, and we have Sandra, who's the devoted Christian. Where would they?
Cherie would probably be bargaining, because she is.
There's a lot of wealth there.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're yeah. So I would think the bargaining might fit her.
Well, not to be very obvious about it, but Natsuki would be depression.
Oh, obviously.
Yeah.
So again, like you can kind of see the different stages, and again, some of them kind of slip in and out. They go to different. They represent different ones at different points in the show and whatnot. But if you want to make this again kind of a big metaphor for the grieving process and coming to terms with your own mortality, you spend an awful lot of time confusing the audience about the status of magic and the cult. And again, if you want this to be, how do you deal with the end of your life, especially if you're young and you didn't really get to live a long period of time? There's plenty of, as Mark said, there's plenty of grist for the mill there. There's plenty of material to be mined. But you then muddy the waters with the supernatural, and it just becomes confused about what you're trying to do here.
I'm with you guys. Cut anything associated with Paragon and the cult and make it a TV, not Y7, but
14.
14, 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah.
You could do TV
Yeah.
14 pretty easily.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what American Horror Story is, TV 14, and
Mhm.
it blurs the line at times to that mature audience. But I think you could have still done the cult, but have it as like kind of underlying throughout the entire thing. Just kind of give like nods to what when they're telling the story, have like some kind of reference to it. Like
you know what you need for that if you want to do it this way? I think you need a recurring character throughout all of their stories.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Who's
Just kind
the
of have a nod to it.
That could have been good.
And it would need to be a recurring character, like again, a recurring character or a recurring actor who doesn't actually change to the story, but is always the same, always presented the same. So they feel very alien when they pop up in different locations.
And,
And it would
and portrayed by an actor who is not previous. Not in the house.
Absolutely not in the house. And
Eh,
that's going to kind of add to the eeriness of what's going on without necessarily going too far overboard.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and having like as a background character, not somebody that's going to be chewing a lot of scenery, just kind of a brief interaction, just kind of in the background, just a wink and a nod that is kind of like a thread through all the stories. That
Maybe a
is,
tease at the end, kind of like
yeah,
the end of The Shining, where we see a picture of the former Midnight Club and that character, not the character, but the actor.
yeah, the
is a
actors in
part
the
of it.
picture.
So it's kind of like the idea. It's like, how did they know about this person? Well, maybe there is a presence in the house that seeped into their stories.
Right. You could have like woven that in.
And it
One-
would blur the lines nicely too, because it could also be, we've all walked past this picture 100 times, so it's all just kind of imprinted on us subconsciously.
Exactly.
I mean,
and
there's-
it would have gave you cohesion through
Yeah.
everything and tying everything together a little bit more neatly.
Yeah, there's a fun little thread here that gets introduced, and then sadly I don't think explored enough, where they discover, they kind of mention it when we first are introduced to the club. It's been going as long as we've been coming here. So whoever got there first, like, yeah, it was the other people were doing it when I got here, and then it's just kind of perpetuated itself. And then they find records going back, much later, where here's where it originally started. Which again, like I don't know if you've ever been part of something that is kind of almost insular but self-perpetuating like that. I had a weird moment about this with when it comes to scouting. I was heavily involved in scouting in my teenage years, as most people especially at that time, most people of my faith are. And I became an adult, and years later I got to go on a few other campouts with my two youngest brothers when they started in on that. And it's really odd to kind of see some of the same idiosyncrasies that we all did still just kind of, they just exist because there's always turnover, but there's always somebody who knows.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
you get, I mean, the what's the big one? if you want to get smoke to stop blowing in your face, you say fluffy bunnies. I don't know where that thing came from. No earthly idea, but that's something that you do.
Yeah.
And seeing that happen just randomly, some other some other kids said it as we're setting up camp or what. I just had a moment of pause, like, huh. Some of this stuff really does kind of live forever that way.
Yeah, and what would be even better is, I mean, when she's getting the tour of the house, and they say that this is the hall of alumni, basically. You could have, right there was your opportunity. And what would have even been better if they would have had, like, they could have done this and it would have been perfect because it would have been subconsciously. Heather Langenkamp could have been an original member of the Midnight Club that kind of transcended and is kind of woven
a picture
in.
of young Heather.
Yeah, and woven in because she's so prominent in their lives that subconsciously she's going to be included in their stories just like they done, but have it like where you've got her kind of at the forefront, have like another character just in the background that is in a older picture, like we said, with them, and just kind of have it, and where she's actually got all this interaction, she's automatically ingrained in their stories, as like you said, we kind of fill in those gaps with people we know. So this would have been a good way to tie all three of the three parts together. You would have got a more cohesive storytelling. You could have got winks and nods throughout those episodes to, like, okay, well, why does she keep popping up as this? And because the mind and the psyche is one to go to what you're familiar to.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if you wanted to have Anya as, like, because she was the oldest one there, have her be the one that is, especially when we get the big reveal with the ballerina, have her be the one that kind of is, after, you could have closed on everything and just had like Anya, because we know they're terminally ill, and like have, when the last person of this Midnight Club is passing away, have Anya come back in a different, like, depiction of her to carry on the Midnight Club.
All right, Netflix, I think you need to hire us. We're better writers than what you hired on for this series. I think we just came up with some really good ideas for you.
Yeah. Again,
paid intern.
I think that there was an idea when they kind of put pen to paper here that we're going to get 2 or 3 seasons. So some of the ideas that they have, they tease here, and we get like stage 1 of what's pretty clearly meant to be multiple stages. And now you're stuck in a bit of a limbo position where you're just hoping that Netflix decides that your numbers are good enough for Netflix to go, you know what, sure, make seasons 2 and 3 and whatnot. Because otherwise, yeah, this is narratively deeply unfulfilling on a tremendous, tremendous level.
Do you think that maybe the reason why it was so bogged down and everything, that he went in having like a 5 to 6 episode tight story, and Netflix was like, no, we need to flesh this out to 10 episodes?
Could have been.
Maybe.
Crazier things have happened.
What I think could have worked even better is 5 episodes, a tight 5 episodes, season 1, because like I said, these kids are terminal. They're not going to live forever. That's why they're at this house. Just have a set. Okay, we're doing 15 episodes, 5 episodes, nice concrete. That way you could see the progression of the deterioration of the characters, and then have it have a definite, say, 15 episode end where the last remaining member of this Midnight Club succumbs to their illness.
You might even want to do you could even do something like a Fear Street thing
Yeah.
where you have a group of 5
That
or
would have been
6
good.
do like 5 or 6 that you start with, and then you get 5 or 6 episodes. Next season, there's only one of that original cast left,
Right.
who is now introducing everyone else to it, and then we kind of cycle through that way. And it becomes this kind of, because of the shortened lifespans, we do get like multi-generational exploration of whatever mystery you want to tell about this.
Or one of the cult members infiltrate the Midnight Club. And
Yeah.
that would have been, that could have been your big reveal of like they keep having these, because they set it up perfectly when she vanishes for 2 weeks and then she comes back in cured. Have that be the cult member that infiltrated the house. They vanish to take back what they're learning about the house, about what's going on, and then have them show back up, quote unquote, cured, because they was never sick to begin with.
Yeah.
And just have it, and then you kind of introduce the cult that way. I think that would have been a more concrete way to kind of tighten this up a little bit and portray the tone that they were going for.
That, or we need a little bit more credit to Heather Langenkamp for this, because she is able to play concerned and empathetic, but just have enough underlying kind of offness to be unsettling. And
yeah, I mean, let's just face it. At the end, when she takes the wig off and
Yeah.
she's got the freaking hourglass tattoo on her neck, I think we all just raised a collective. What?
Yeah.
it kind of, that makes sense to me on some level, but that's one of those things, like, I really need to see what the actual plan is for that, because there's a lot of ways it could go.
Mm-hmm.
It could easily be that her thing is, yeah, I was one of them. I'm the one who actually figured out how this works. And in order to stave off my own illness, all I need is for this special location for people to die here. I don't have to do anything all that special beyond that. But as long as you're here and as long as you all keep dying on a regular clip, I'm okay.
Again, Netflix, call us.
And
You get that one for free. That's the last one I'm giving out for free tonight.
I would have loved to have it like show her at like her actual home away from that, like doing research and everything, and then just pan back and say that she lived on Elm Street. I would have popped for that. Just as a wink and nod.
Just something.
Robert, I almost forgot. There was another comment that you left on the chat that I'm kind of surprised you haven't brought up yet. How dare you have someone work at S-Mart and have no mention of Bruce Campbell?
There's an episode where Anya we find out she's dying. Like, she's in the last kind of throes of her life. She's delirious and she's dreaming. And in her dream / nightmare at the time, she got cured. Whatever ritual they did worked. Everyone else died, though, and now she's not sure how to go on with life, but she's, living, and her job is at S-Mart. Now, if you're like me and have seen the Evil Dead franchise and get a kick out of Shop Smart, Shop S-Mart, you don't get to just throw that in there without some kind of Bruce Campbell reference. I don't care what it is, but you got to throw something in there.
Or at least like have him come through the line as a customer, or be the manager.
Or just have to do a voiceover just as a customer. Just have it be, we know Bruce Campbell's voice.
Yeah.
Let him be the disembodied voice on the PA system.
Yeah, that would have been good.
But yeah, it's like, why?
Or he is there, because we know Ash never graduated above Stalker. Have him be the stock boy in the back.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Why throw that reference in there if you're not going to do anything with it? There's no point to an Easter egg just for the sake of an Easter egg.
Yeah, have the payoff.
Yeah, there's a few of those kind of scattered throughout this, and I get that it's kind of Flanagan paying homage to his influences and whatnot, and that's fine. But again, you get a couple of Stephen King references, which is not surprising considering Flanagan's a big fan of his work. Again, you have a few Lovecraft references with, kind of the eerie cult, and then I mentioned earlier, you have Amash actually make the Cthulhu joke at one point. It's okay to have those in there, but there's a degree of payoff that becomes necessary. Otherwise, this comes across as a little bit self-indulgent and just a little bit too much winking and nodding at the camera. Or okay. I heard the Rings of Power series. I'm not going to get into this. Okay, so I'm referencing this for a specific reason.
It's like we are not discussing Rings of Power tonight on the grounds of I have pumpkins to carve.
But I heard it described as at least like 70% the pointing Leonardo DiCaprio meme.
Yeah.
Like if you're familiar or not, you need to be familiar with the lore. But if you are, hey, that's Gandalf. Hey, that's whatever. Like there's a lot of that. And
I never associate that Leonardo DiCaprio meme. I always associate the Avengers with Steve Rogers going, I got that reference. That's always the way I remember it.
Yeah, either of those works. But you run the risk when you have this many kind of homages without any kind of real narrative heft or payoff. It becomes a little bit, again, it's a little bit just too much trying to, hey, I got that reference, without actually contributing to the narrative or the emotional tone.
Yeah. Jason, nice shot of your neck.
I know, it's pretty nice.
Sorry, I just looked down. I'm like, what the?
I think the last thing I want to touch on, they fudge the timeline on some of the music they choose for this movie, for this show.
Oh, there is so many anachronisms.
There's
all
a
over the
lot
place.
of this
Somebody
stuff.
did not do enough research.
There's a lot of this that, like, there's this kind of blending of the late 90s and the early 2000s that goes on, and I get it. There's a lot of overlap. I really do. But if again, we're getting a pretty hard and fast timeline here of 96, 97, your choice of like Green Day songs then becomes important because we know which ones came out after that particular date.
There was one episode they make the comment about the International Space Station. That didn't launch till 98.
Yeah.
So there is a ton of anachronisms in this.
And it's a bit of a problem. Just a little bit of one. Especially
for nitpicky little nerds like us.
Again, especially when you as a show make an issue out of it. I think one of the better period pieces from somewhat relatively recently, especially in the timeline, if you've never seen No Country for Old Men, that movie is set in literally 1980. And I saw an interview with some of the costume designers and whatnot who said that was a real pain in the butt year because trying to, what did people wear in 1980? And the reality is a lot of it was holdover from the 70s because the 80s style hadn't developed yet. But you couldn't.
Style didn't really develop till I'd say 85.
Yeah, but you couldn't lean into the 70s aesthetic either because then you're signaling, too much 70s. So there's this weird kind of hybrid period around in 80, 81 when you have the 70s kind of style choices in terms of like suits, but a lot of the coloration and a lot of the material and whatnot is very different from what it was at like the peak 70s. And nailing that is very hard. So I'd say that to say I understand the difficulty inherent in this. Mm-hmm. But again, if you make a point about your timeline, you're going to get held accountable to it.
Well, is there anything else we want to talk about, or have we beaten this poor show into the ground enough?
I think the last thing I want to say, again, Flanagan does a great job with mood and atmosphere. It's kind of what he does best. And there's a nice atmosphere to this show. I think it's unfortunate that the tone is so all over the place. We mentioned the actors, they do the best with what they've got to work with, and, they do. So good on them for that.
I'm going to say I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of these actors show back up in the fall of the House of Usher. I really think they're going to do great things in the future.
I imagine so. This is not it sounds like I think it comes across like we hate the show. I don't think any of us hate the show. It's just a letdown relative to expectations.
Yeah. It's not bad per se, but it's bland.
It's very bland.
It's very bland.
The expectation versus reality was very skewed because the trailer looked phenomenal. Looked like we was going to get something that was right in all three of our wheelhouses to a varying degree, what we got was meh.
And it's a very unfinished narrative, ultimately, too. And again, if they're able to get multiple seasons, then they can fix some of this stuff. If they wind up being standalone, this does not have a satisfactory conclusion.
Let this be an example of things you don't do in the future.
And the rewatchability is not there.
No, not
Barring-
whatsoever.
Barring like refreshing yourself for another second season, yeah, there's nothing of rewatch value here.
Absolutely. All right, so Flanagan, we do still love you. We do still love your work. Please don't let us down with the fall of the House of Usher.
If you do, we will light torches and come with you with pitchforks.
Oh, great.
We'll
We're
let
going
you
angry
slide.
mob, huh?
We'll let you slide once because we think Netflix had a hand in it, but we won't let you mess something up like that.
You screw up young adult horror, no one really bats an eye. You screw up Poe, you got a problem.
Very true.
Right.
All right. Well, then I think it is time for us to move on to plugs. Jason, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
You can find me at Mosaic East Coast on Twitter, part of the Mosaic Media Corp, where we do the Second and Short podcast from the cheap seats, where we meet all of your fantasy football needs. We've been kind of on a hiatus because I stated at the top of the show, I almost died and I was on vacation. So we're getting back into the swing of things. Tyler is doing a lot of amazing stuff over there with his graphics, and we're getting the Mosaic Media brand out there. So go check us out on any of your podcast listening forums, as well as the pictures and interviews and stuff that Tyler's putting up on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
All right. Mr. Winfree?
You can find me at various places. I host the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast if you're interested in the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. This last week was a review of UFC 280, which was a great card on paper. But when you have a disputed decision, a co-main event where one of the fighters was basically fraudulent in the build-up to the fight, and his shoulder was basically held together with chewing gum, literally dislocated like 10 seconds into the fight.
I had a car radio that was held together with chewing gum. I'm not kidding.
I believe it. And a main event that was important, but maybe not quite as fireworks as people were anticipating, which is, your anticipation there is going to be your anticipation. But my full review of that event is up on the latest episode, as well as a preview of this week's coming event. UFC on ESPN Plus 71, headlined by Calvin Kattar and Arnold Allen. Yes, Arnold Allen. Another British prospect at featherweight who I occasionally confuse him with, but this is Allen, which is a good fight. So if you want a preview of that, again, the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. I cover professional wrestling a few nights a week over at 411mania.com. AEW's Dark Elevation, that's their YouTube squash show on Mondays. MLW, if they release stuff on Thursdays, and they should be getting back to releasing stuff, I think, in November. So I'll be on the lookout for that. And WWE SmackDown on Fridays. So if you're interested in any of that, I'm over there. Friday, the SmackDown stuff is live. The other stuff is taped, but you can find my full reports. I do occasionally get drafted into other live coverage. So I will pop up on other stuff from time to time. And I cover the UFC events. So Saturday, again, the UFC event. Be on the lookout for that. And thankfully, no one I work for knows that Anderson Silva is boxing Jake Paul on Saturday, or I might be covering that.
No one needs to be exposed to Jake Paul.
There's a decent chance he gets knocked out this time.
Okay, I'd pay money to see that.
That's kind of what they're betting on.
All right. As far as my time here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, I've got a few days off, but I will be back to host a discussion on the first season of House of the Dragon. David Wright will be joining us along with David Lazaro and Andrew Orozco. Oh my God, Andrew, I'm so sorry. My mind blanked there. I forgot your name. I feel terrible.
Because there was another Andrew.
There is another Andrew. But we're looking forward to that. As far as my time where I have not sold my soul to Mark Radulich, Honeysuckle Rose Creations, where fashion meets fandom at the intersection of geek and chic. We just wrapped up our final convention for 2022. That was at Anime NebraskaCon in Omaha. Wonderful turnout, great convention. Really hope to be back there next year. In the meantime, we are getting our stores ready for our Black Friday sale that's going to be kicking off, and we will be doing our charity drive, in which from Black Friday to Christmas Eve, every order that is placed, we will donate $5 to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. That is any order that is placed from either our Etsy shop or our Handmade at Amazon shop. As always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's Honeysuckle Rose Creations, the intersection of geek and chic. And for Jason Teasley and Robert Winfree, I'm Alexis Hejna saying, be well, be safe, behave.